Hey guys, so I guess I've been thinking about making the following video for a very long time, and I've been first of all debating whether or not I should even make the video, because I don't know if there's people who would even relate to what I'm saying, much less understand what I'm saying. And the second thing is it's kind of I don't want to say necessarily even private, but more just a very, very, I want to say esoteric topic. But then when I thought about it, I realized it's not so esoteric, and I realized, and I thought to myself that it's possible that there's other people who either been through this or feel the same way I do. So I said, maybe it might be worth talking about, especially given everything that's going on now. Guys, as you guys know, I didn't grow up in a religious family. I grew up traditional, but I always grew up, like God conscious, I guess you could say, whatever I understood to be God, however I quantified that, however I conceptualized that, however I, whatever name I gave it or whatever. And by the way, everything I'm about to say, I'm not saying from perspective of like, oh, I'm like this and everybody else is like this, or other people are like this, or I'm better and they're like this and whatever. It's just something I noticed, and it's something I kind of observe. So I didn't grow up religious, and I guess you could say in retrospect, hindsight being 20/20, the closer, if I look at the timeline of my life, the closer I got to starting to learn Torah, I noticed it's almost as if Hashem was pulling me towards Him, whichever way He wanted, but knowing, it's almost like He knew at different stages what would be the language that I would understand, if that makes any sense. Meaning, in my early 20s, there was a certain language of music, right? Or even, not only early 20s, but all throughout my 20s. And then in my mid-20s, late 20s especially, it was a language of, going to Israel, visiting Israel, right? Multiple times. And then it's interesting, after I had gone to Israel, the last time I went to Israel, He already combined, He brought Torah into my life, and then He combined the two, Like, I can look at this whole trajectory and this whole kind of like, you ever see like you ever watch how like, the, a Lego set is assembled, or like how, what is it called? The transformer, the robot changes from a car to a, what is it called? To the robot, or vice versa. So it's almost like I can see now that transformation in retrospect. Yeah? So He was at different stages. He was doing different. He was speaking to me in different languages, right? And adding things. Let's put it that way. Interesting that I say that, because in my teenage years, I was going to shul, synagogue, only on the high holidays. Let's say Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, right? And we had Passover at home, and my father would give me like these interesting talks on the way, to and from synagogue every year. How we live in this virtual world, and how all the stuff you hear today from like on social media, all this we live in a simulation. Folks, I heard this when I was 15 years old, in the year 1995. That's the advantage that I have, having a this kind of, I would say, high level computer programmer father, and giving me these ideas. Like when I saw the movie The Matrix, I mentioned this before on the podcast many times. I called the first thing I did when I got out of the theater, I took my friend's phone, this like Motorola brick phone, and I called my father, and I'm like, they owe you royalties. He's like, Greg, you think I'm the only one with these ideas? He's like, you think people in Hollywood doesn't have these ideas? You're wrong. I'm like, okay. This is like 1999, whenever that movie came out, right? So all these ideas were baking in my head since I'm 15 years old, and then you see the trajectory, right? Basically the idea that like we live in a matrix, right? So next thing you know, I'm giving you guys a short version, I integrate Torah and Israel together. Oh wow, there's like deer here, guys. I think is that deer or a wolf? Not sure. Anyway, hope it's not a wolf. Yeah, it's probably a deer. Looks like a deer. Anyway, it's already dark in this park. Anyway, so basically when I started integrating everything, all of this matrix stuff came back, right? All of this like concept that everything's a matrix came back to me. And basically I started seeing the world as that, which is kind of crazy. Like the more I started tapping into the Torah and mitzvahs, the more I started seeing everything around me as a matrix, if that makes any sense. And so guys, where am I leading to with all this? Well, it's one thing to live in Jerusalem as a Baal Tshuva guy, and you see the world as a matrix, and the thing is, when you see the world as a matrix, for lack of a better explanation, and you live in a place, let's say like Jerusalem, where everything is hashgacha pratis every single day, you see how everything comes together every single day, every single nanosecond. It's very easy to see it, right? And even many of the people who live there, especially the people who like live in the old city, people who also are like myself, didn't grow up religious, became religious later in life for similar paths, similar reasons, similar mindsets, right? And then so you spend some time there. See, folks, it's, some people watching this will understand what I'm saying. Most people, right over their heads. And then you come back to America, right? So in America, right, so now you're back, in my case, right, I'm back in America. This is like 12 years ago. So as a religious Jew, for the first time living in America as a religious Jew, which I never did. And it's a whole different realm, right? Everybody is, listen, for lack of a better explanation, everybody's very into materialism, like almost like for its own sake, not, because they want to do good and whatever it is. Not to say that they don't, but it seems that way, right? More so. And most people, the majority of the religious community in America, particularly where I live, are people who grew up religious, right? So they grew up religious. They're part of a certain culture. They're seemingly, not to say that they're not connected to God. They are, but a lot of people are focusing more on the culture than on Hashem. At least that's what it seems like, right? Or they're focusing more on the parochial aspects of the culture, or the academic aspects. Let's say if you're a guy learning Torah, they went to these schools, right, with Torah schools, whatever it is. They're focusing on how people dress. They're focusing on how people talk and walk and what they eat, where they go, what school they went to, what this, what that, right? All this stuff, right? It's almost like a Jewish version of like, I don't know, wealthy aristocracy from like the political world of America, right? Like the Jewish version of that, right? Where you from, where you this, where you that, all that kind of stuff, right? Things to me that have nothing to do with God at all. Which I came to find out later might. But in general, I don't think they do. I don't think even God looks at that stuff. Honestly, I don't, except for if you're a Cohen. I think that's the only thing he looks at, really. So yeah. So living in that space, right? So you come to see, a person in my position comes to see, experience all of that, right? Being in a social circle with all of that, well, these kind of social circles, and again, I'm not saying this to say I'm better than other people, or those people like this and I'm like this and I see this and they don't see it, and I'm trying to like stay away from that whole, message. But folks, it's been very, very difficult for me in that regard. And I could say, well, Tzvi, why don't you go back to Israel? I did twice. And what's funny? I went back to Israel. So, I came back here in 2013. I came back to Israel just before COVID, January 2020. The craziest thing happened. When I was in Israel, I don't know if you guys remember, Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. And right when that happened, I was like, oh man. And I remember distinctly where I was. I was in the old city. I was leaving the old city to go back, walking back to my apartment in Abu Tor. And I was walking towards, what is it called? Towards Zion Gate, the back, what I call the back entrance of the old city. Very cool area they have this Armenian compound, whatever it is. So I'm walking there and I see, oh man, Kobe Bryant is no longer with us. I'm like, what? Right when that happened, I was like, okay. And right before that, I was just hanging around Jerusalem for a couple of weeks, not really know what to do with myself. I just, in my mind, I had just like escaped America. Like, the Jewish world of America, and I was back home. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And then as soon as I heard Kobe Bryant passed away, I'm like, oh man. I had this feeling in my bones that something is coming. Some big, like, monumental, I don't know, event or period of time was upon us. I didn't know what. And then shortly after they announced basically that, like, oh, and then Purim happens. I go to a party in like the woods, like it was like a Jerusalem forest, actually, really cool party, Purim party. And then a couple of days later, a day after that, they were like, okay, COVID. They just like announced COVID, the whole world. Next thing you know, Israel's like locked down. We can't leave anywhere, this and that. I remember like there was a whole thing like you could maybe like leave your house for a certain period of time. And then they just like literally started finding people immediately. And then they gave us like, I'm not going to go, you guys, like for those of you who were in Israel, there was like maps of like, 500 meters within your house where you couldn't go. I remember going to like pharmacies trying to get like quercetin. They kept like running out of quercetin. People kept buying quercetin, quercetin and zinc. Remember like that whole thing. And then so I was like, wow, So then I was thinking to myself, okay, this is clearly what I like to call a God moment, right? That's the first thing I thought. And a lot of people thought that, right? A lot of people were like, okay, everybody who's tapped in, and then I remember like the whole thing, Dr. Zelenko, and then I was like talking to, to Frank. He started calling me, we started talking. Next thing you know, they come out with the, with the stuff, the what, and I remember saying to myself, I know for sure that the religious people will see right through this. I'm expecting the religious people to see right through this. Lo and behold, my friends, what did we find? That a lot of the people who grew up religious, especially in Israel, in the Dati Leumi world, ended up taking this stuff. And then that's when I was reminded that, yeah, I've definitely left the matrix, whatever, if there is a matrix, and then they're still in the matrix for whatever reason, right? It's crazy, folks. I've said this many times. These are the same people who, go to Minyan 3 times a day, learn Daf Yomi, learn way more Torah than I do. And yeah, guys. So, just 1 second. So yeah, so I was a little bit. On the one hand, it was like very disappointing, but when I thought about it deeper, I wasn't surprised. So, where am I going with all this? There was a point to this, yes. I guess what I'm saying is, guys, sometimes I feel like when you realize that you did something and you flipped your life upside down, only to find out that the people that you that are involved with what you're doing are either not as excited about, so to speak, the mission as you are, or they're seeing it from a completely different lens. Meaning, because they grew up in it, they're not seeing. All they're seeing again is the physical aspects of it, and they're missing. They're missing the forest and the trees, and I don't blame them. Because they grew up this way. Now you could say, well, sweet, not everybody who grew up religious is disconnected from Hashem or whatever, or is, you see a lot of these, you meet these Mikubalim, they grew up religious, or maybe their father was a Mikubal, and they're also Mikubal. Yeah, of course you have that. Go to any religious, area, whether it's in Israel, America, or everywhere else, you have that, for sure. For example, most of the Mikubalim that I met, they come from religious families, right? Or some kind of lineage of big rabbis, right? So, of course, Lubavitch Rebbe also, I never met him, but for sure, like, prime example, So, obviously, what I'm saying doesn't really, it's not across the board, right? So, at the same time, guys, I find myself it's funny, I find it difficult to relate to now secular Jews, even though I've met plenty of secular Jews who are also, have pulled themselves outside of the matrix of that we think is this world, and also, but at the same time, I met a lot of religious people who can't relate with them, And go to the house for Shabbos, I see them at events, I see them at, simchas and all that stuff, weddings, this, that. Just can't relate to them. Not only culturally, I can't relate to them. Just can't relate to them. So there's a few of us, my friends, that are kind of stuck on our own little, figurative island. It's not really a physical place. Spiritual island. And that's also why it's funny, I found it difficult to meet somebody because, guys, listen. A lot of the ladies, also guys too, but for some reason more so ladies who are tapped in that way, tend to be a little, something's going on up there. And that's the thing, guys. I feel like I'm one of the few, at least as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong about myself. I feel like I'm one of the few. What do they say? The people who think that who's insane is the person who thinks that they are sane. Who's actually insane but thinks they're sane. And who's sane is the person who knows they're insane. If that makes any sense, So yeah, as you can see, guys, it's been very, very difficult for me to put everything I'm saying into words, everything I'm feeling into words with regards to this topic. But I guess what it boils down to is something very, very simple. There's a world, right? and then there's like the world beyond the world, where there's like something, there's the world is a veil, right? I'm boiling this down to what all of our Svarim say, or the Kabbalim say, that the world is a veil, right? It's a veneer, and then beyond that is what's actual reality. So, unfortunately or fortunately, when you're somebody like me, you take on Torah and mitzvot later in life. But also you have certain life experiences, certain things that you've seen, certain things that you've just experienced before that happens, or as that happens, or in the process of that happening. And then everything after that, also you have experiences. And so you kind of start to see beneath the veil, and it kind of becomes, or it is basically a blessing and a curse, right? And then you try to, somehow even socially relate to people who don't. It's difficult. And then go try explaining to someone, hey, someone who wants to set you up with like, on a date. Hey, why didn't, like, let's say you go on a date and you're like, and then they ask you, well, why didn't it click? Well, I don't know. She's kind of she's a matrix person. How do you explain it? I can't date a girl who's a matrix person. What do I say? Like, she's in the matrix. I'm Neo. I don't know. Like, what? Does that make sense? You know what I mean? So, or just like, I don't know. And by the way, guys, the thing, the what is included in that, right? I'm also looking for somebody who didn't take that stuff, right? Because that's already just on a simple level. Forget about matrix and not matrix. That's just simple decision making and judgment, right? You could say people got pressured and coerced at work and money. Okay, I mean, it kind of gives somebody a pass, but even so, it's like, I know people who weren't forced to do it and still took it, right? So, I don't know. And again, the ones who didn't tend to be woohoo. Even though I think the ones who did are cuckoo. But you know what I mean, right? Folks, I'm even debating whether or not to post this video, because some people will get offended. It'll be like a range of people who will just be like either offended at what I say, or confused by what I say, or just both, for sure. And then there'll be those few people who will understand what the hell I'm talking about. But the takeaway is probably going to be, for the most people, Tzvi, why are you still here in America? Well, I've been made to understand, it's been explained to me, that I guess Hashem wants me here. I guess to help my family, and physically, spiritually, maybe even materially. But yeah, guys, I mean, it's just, sometimes I feel like no matter where I go, whether it's in religious circles or secular circles, it's funny, somebody once said, oh, you're not religious enough for the religious, and you're too religious for the secular. But I don't think it's that, guys. I think it's more just, again, when Hashem gives you, I guess, what's both a blessing and a curse, then, at some point you get to a point where you're just like, you start to feel like you're an alien. They're constantly talking about UFOs, UAPs, whatever you call them now, whatever wording they want to use. At some point, I kind of joked back in December, we started seeing all those drones, and I was like, I was telling my friend, I was like, when did they come to take me? When did they come to take me? Most of the shuls I go to, people took the stuff. People were asleep. There's nothing to talk to them about. You could talk Torah, this and that, but it's just like, everybody, I remember guys, when October 7th happened, right? And you know, when I first heard that the army, the wonderful army who just bombed the crap out of Iran, right? And Mossaded the hell out of everybody. It's a term now, Mossaded. We Mossaded them. We Mossaded, you know, Hezbollah. We Mossaded Iran. We Mossaded everybody. So an army, a country that can Mossad people, beepers and this and that and drones inside a country to blow up their things, cannot respond for 7 hours to a freaking attack by orcs, my friends. And I mentioned this to people in my shul, in my minyan, anybody who would listen. And it was everything ranging from like I'm fomenting, like discord in the nation, to just like I'm a conspiracy theorist. My friends, I mean, I get the feeling that the Imamish took away whatever this stuff was that people took away, and this is something that my friend Owana wrote today or yesterday on X, on Twitter. It took away people's discernment, people's ability to discern what the hell is what. Just on a simple freaking level, just to use their, I don't know, some part of their brain that allows them to analyze these things like a logical person without being afraid that this and that, you know? Somebody's going to call them brand them something or whatever it is. My friends. And I was just talking to my friend today, by the way. It's funny, like, and I was telling him, I'm worried about a friend of ours, mutual friend of ours, that, young guy who took three things, 3 times, and he had to go to the hospital recently. And my friend goes to me, I hear you, and I agree with you, and I whatever. But then he's like, but this thing is so in the back of our mind now. My friend lives in Israel. We're focused on the obvious in front of us. I'm like, yeah. And I go, isn't that so, quote unquote, convenient, right? They terrorized everybody for 3 years or 4 years. They forced everybody to take stuff, especially in Israel. You can't say anything. In Israel, folks, if you say anything about this thing, you're a psycho. You should be locked up in a mental hospital, right? And now we have a war for the past 2 years, right? So they went straight, they on-ramped straight from, the terrorization of people's brains and needles right into a war. Folks, not to say that, there are orcs who attacked us. There were. And we've done an amazing job in, basically destroying all the entities we thought were so whatever, right? So scary. But at the same time, guys, all the stuff is being memory hold, right? And society at large, but also especially the religious community, folks, religious Jewish community, who is supposedly connected to Hashem, who's supposedly awake, is so flippin' asleep. And my friends, I've never felt so alone as I have now. Folks, I don't know if anybody else feels this. I feel alone. A person who didn't take the crap, a person who's about Tshuva, so doesn't connect to any, people who grew up religious, who didn't take the stuff, even one, right? And who also thinks like that, whatever. The army could have finished this war months ago, and is deliberately, for whatever reason, not finishing off the worst regime of all time, because I don't know what, because somebody else is telling them not to, I don't know. Folks, I mean, I know there are people watching this who see what I see and understand what I understand, and who maybe have gone through the same things, just in different different ways, in terms of just becoming religious or becoming Jewish, or thought about becoming Jewish, thought about becoming religious, thought about moving to Israel, did move to Israel, did come back, did not come back, whatever, right? Some different permutations of something, right? Similar to me. But my friends, what makes me sad is that we're in a minority here. And the majority of the Jewish religious world is just going back to quote unquote normal. Now they're on to Israel, quote unquote, Israel advocacy stuff. I'm kind of part of it, but not really, right? Again, they've memory hold the torture that they went through from 2020 to 2023. Maybe because they just want to forget about it. They want to move on with their lives. or whatever they put in their bodies, whatever conditioning they received during that time, almost like numbed them. Again, my friend Nuwana wrote about this, right? And it was all part of, connected to the people who did it, who were, whatever, it's a whole nomenclature. Marxism mixed with Salk realism, all these things, right? It's a whole different conversation, which I'll include. But guys, as a Baal Tshuva person, as a Baal Tshuva guy, and as a person who's just, I guess, always been connected on a raw level. Again, it's a blessing and a curse. Even if I never even put on Chas Shalom, even if I had never ever kept Shabbos, even if I had never ever put on tefillin even once in my life, or I don't know, kept kosher or anything of the sort, or learned Torah ever, I have a feeling I still would have been this way. And the only question remains is, would I have taken the stuff anyway? Who the hell knows? Would I have taken the stuff? Rather. Probably not. I'll tell you guys something. In a way, I'm glad that there was a job opportunity that I had, that I thought I was going to get. Literally, that I came this close to being hired. And I know for a fact, had I stayed, been hired there initially, and had I stayed there, until basically COVID hit, I would have been in a situation where, there would have been a mandate, and there would have been a lot of pressure, family pressure, to take because they would have told me, oh, you want to lose your position, and you lose your. I know for a fact I would have had some kind of something over there, prestigious, not prestigious, but something significant, something to lose, right? And I would have gotten pressed like a pancake by my family and by society. I would have been pressed. They would have been pressing me like a pancake, especially since I would have been here and not in Israel, because this was something that that was in New York, and they would have been pressing me like a pancake, just to keep this thing and keep the money and keep the thing and that and that and that. And I say thank you, Hashem, that it did, rejection is protection. And the whole path that I went on, which led me back to Israel, and to be in Israel at that time, and by the way, also to see, everything that was going on from both sides of the pond, because I was traveling back and forth. I was seeing what was going on in America, and I see what was going on in Israel. Interestingly enough, guys, I know a lot of people, specifically in the Hasidic and in the Haredi community, that did not take, because they have a healthy, very healthy, both Israel and America, distrust of government. Baruch Hashem. But again, unfortunately, guys, the community that I thought that I was, let's say, I wouldn't label myself as that, but I'm definitely a part of it, due to the fact of what I do for a living. I'm very involved with it, Judea and Samaria. I was very saddened by the fact that a majority of the people who either live in that place or associate with that sector of Israeli society, Dati Leumi, etc., took this stuff. Like, looking back, or looking upon further, kind of examination, you realize why. Because when you start to think that the state itself is kadosh, again, Frank and I have spoken about this, I've spoken about this, you guys know my stance. When you start to think the state itself is kadosh, and above, it's almost like above God, then anything they direct, any directive they put out, is kadosh. This stuff is kadosh, the stuff that, was pushed on us by mandate. It must be kadosh, which obviously we know it's not, right? So I got to see that. By the way, it was basically a similar thing in America, where it's the modern Orthodox who went, because again, on their end, they don't want to be seen as. So in Israel, it was the state is kadosh. In America, we don't want to be seen as, cavemen who are against science, right? even though science, again guys, we know that's not how science works, right? Science doesn't work according to like where 99.999% of people say do this, and all dissent is disallowed, and what is it called, the censorship and all the rest of it, and all the voices, dissenting voices, are drowned out. That's not how science works. We know that, guys. Any scientist will tell you, right? And the muzzled, what was the phrase? Follow the. Well, people were saying follow the science. I was saying follow the silenced, right? You have to follow the silenced, and there were many doctors and many scientists who were silenced at that time, guys. You know that. And I have friends who are like, oh yeah, but I'm for the thing, but I'm against censorship, I'm against mandates, but I'm for the thing. It's like, again, I've said this many times. It's like saying I'm for, I'm against, what is it called? I'm against, what's his name? Mengele, but I'm for the train cars. Or I'm against the train cars, but I'm for Mengele. Okay. So, my friends, that's really what I wanted to get off my chest, because there's all this whole, it seems like a cholent that's been brewing in my mind, and it's just the reason I haven't spoken about it is because it's been hard to just blurt out. But the short end of it is, it's very difficult for a lot of Bali Tshuva, especially those who became Bal Tshuva in Israel, and then lived in Israel, lived in particular in places like Jerusalem, and maybe also Tzfat. People experience this. And then to live or come back to America, and that's another thing, guys. That's why I lived in Crown Heights for 3 years, because that's really the only place you could feel Hashem outside of Israel, really. Because when you're just used to feeling Hashem, just feeling Him, then everything else is just like complete downgrade. Really, it's a descent. That's why they call making aliyah. That's why they call, when you move to Israel, you make aliyah, because you ascend, right? For those who can actually feel it. And again, blessing and a curse on my end. I can feel it. Yeah. Well, B'ezrat Hashem, everything's gonna work out, but yeah, guys. At some point you just kind of feel like you're stuck in between worlds, and there's very few people who, you can relate to. It's funny, the people who watch this channel understand, I guess. But again, that doesn't help me much, because everybody is in different places around the world, different places around the country, and at the end of the day, you need, you need people around you, right? So, B'ezrat Hashem, gonna get there. For now, it's just watch your loved ones and make sure everybody's safe, and in case things go down, just be vigilant and all the rest of it. That's really the best we can do. Alright, guys, I think tomorrow Frank and I are going to speak. Maybe I'll bring up this topic, I don't know, we'll see. Or maybe we'll have our friend Owana on, and we'll talk about sock realism. Not socks on your feet, socialist realism. And what that actually was, and how that manifests today, and what does it mean in the context of woke, all this woke stuff, and the stuff that we're forced to go through from 2020 until 2023, and why it's being memory hold, and now everything we're going through now with the wars, and what we might go through again very soon. Alright, guys, it's been 40 minutes, and I'm already annoying you, and I'll talk to you later.